So welcome to our program, Gardening for Pollinators in the Pacific Northwest. This is part of the Camano Wildlife Habitat Project. And so before I introduce Brenda and Bob, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Camano Wildlife Habitat Project. So how that works. Okay,
Okay.
so we're an island in harmony with nature, 1 yard at a time. And right now, the Camano Wildlife Habitat Project has 973 certified wildlife habitats. So you can see we're all over the island, and this is when there were only about 700 habitats. We haven't updated our map. So if you haven't certified, we're really trying to get to 1,000 sooner rather than later. And if you have certified, maybe you have friends. So I'll tell you a little bit about it. If you know it, then you can give this spiel because you have, well, this is your rehearsal. And if not, this is what we do. So if I just looked at a map that I went to a meeting the other day, and it showed Camano in 1984 and Camano in 2020. And all the habitat lost is pretty devastating. So I know we started the project in 2002 because rather than sob when I saw the logging trucks cruising off the island, doing things there in our own yard is an action step that we have in our community. So if in all those places that used to be forests that are now yards, if they take this before and go to the after idea, and on Camano, it's kind of keeping what you have. Then the habitat be inserted, even though they're now in developments and acreage. So that's what our project is all about, landscaping for wildlife. And wildlife needs certain things: food, water, shelter, and places to raise young. The food, the shelter, the places to raise young, even the water, all of that can be done with the native plants. And I say water because logs are good for the insects, and Bob's going to tell us about insects tonight. And even a leaf. I saw a frog on one of our garden tours in a in puddled in this big leaf, and it was enjoying the water there. So what we do in our yards is really important, especially like this past year with the salmonella outbreak and having to take our feeders down. When we had things in our yard, it didn't really matter, except for perhaps in the snow days there. They're not as used to that here in this climate. But these are what we need in our yards, and also what we do in our yards. So like when I moved to the island, we had some lawn. We have no lawn now, and I can tell you when I go up the hill into our yard, and it's lush and green and wonderful with all the layers, while our neighbors have brown yards and it's really hot on a hot summer's day. So growing natives conserves water, it eliminates the pesticide use, it helps reduce fertilizer. So there's all these things that you can do in your yard. To certify, you don't have to be a purist. You because when you certify, all of a sudden you become more you understand what's going on in your yard a little bit more, and you maybe care a little bit more. I know I will stop and fill the bird bath now that I'm a certified habitat, because on a hot summer day it can evaporate pretty quickly. So what we do in our yards makes us a little bit more conscientious of what we do in the future. So, and it's also doing the bigger picture that we're doing on Camano, is trying to link corridors and what we do in our yards so that it can kind of link to the parks and things that are on the island. So it's a simple way to go about certifying your yard. It's a simple application. You can find this application on our website. This one, I've changed the address so you mail it to us, and I can bird dog the application process through the National Wildlife Federation. You can also go directly to the National Wildlife Federation. We'll find out that you do it sooner or later. When you send it in and I watch it through, then I can count. And we're at 973 now, and I'm just eager to get to 1,000. And once you certify, you can put up a wildlife habitat sign. On the left is our Camano one, and that's $15. You can certify, and I can even meet you at the parking lot at Terry's Corner and sell you a sign there. So even in these COVID times, it's easy to get you a sign. In fact, you can certify and get the sign at the same time. If you're certified with the National Wildlife Federation, well, it's a certification with National Wildlife Federation. But if you like Ranger Rick, you can get the sign once you have your number there too. So when people see these signs, I get phone calls and people say, well, I want a sign. I can do all that. So it's great promotion for our project. It also lends itself to yard art in your yard so that if things are a little messy and untidy, which is great for wildlife habitat, then the sign gives it purpose. And you can see that this is a bit of a, in the Puget Sound area especially, there's a lot of community, and on Camano, we were the 2nd in the state and the 10th in the nation, and there are now 138 certified habitats in the nation. So it's an action step for communities and taking what we do in our yards and connecting with other yards so that we really do make a difference and are helping reestablish some corridors and taking a little bit of that bleak development out, because grass is pretty sterile. But with native plants and what you do with layering, it's pretty nice to go sit in your garden oasis. So for more information, you can go to our website or you can go to the National Wildlife Federation. And here are some references if you want to know more. The Living with Wildlife and Landscaping for Wildlife, they're written by Russell Link, biologist with the Washington State Fish and Wildlife Department. And then this is the updated version of Tracking Birds that the National Wildlife Federation has had. They had another version out for years and they just updated it. So with that, I will introduce Brenda and Bob. So the way we're doing this tonight, which is it's quite nice because we have had pollinator programs and we've had native plant programs. And tonight, Brenda and Bob are doing it together, and it's what it's all about. It's showing that connection that we live in a world that the things are all connected to each other. What we do affects the critters, and what we plant and what we allow to flit about in our yards is really beneficial for everything. So Brenda will be speaking second, so I'll introduce her first and go to Bob, and then he can just start. So Brenda, she's a biologist and an artist. She used to work with the National Park Service and the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. Right now, she is the manager of the Washington Native Plant Society and Plant Society Garden in Mount Vernon. And so the Solal chapter of the National Plant Society, or excuse me, I'm getting National Wildlife Federation, National Parks in this. The Native Plant Society has a display garden in Mount Vernon, and Brenda is in charge of that. And it's quite exciting right now because you can go right after tonight's show, you can go and order for their native plant sale that's going on right now. So it's an online sale, and you can order, and that you can order up until April 25th, that's Sunday. And then you can April 30th or May 1st. And I think you have appointments to pick it up. So that's available once you find out about the native plants tonight. Brenda also is a master gardener, past chair of the Solal chapter of the Washington Native Plant Society. So she will tell us about the native plants, but before that, we're going to learn about the pollinators from Bob Gillespie. And he's a retired entomology professor at Wenatchee Valley College, and he has a passion for pollinators. And he and his students, after classes and after hours, would go and see how the native bees related to the native plants. And he's still pursuing that endeavor with a passion. And tonight he's going to tell us about bees and butterflies and the pollinators. So with that, I will escape my and stop sharing. Oh, Roxy, can you help me do that?
I've done it. Bob can start anytime.
Okay, and Bob can start.
That's great. We can see that, Bob.
Can you see it now?
Yes, it's working. Thank you.
Okay, so first off, I got to put on my bald-faced hornet ensemble. This is what I wear to give my pollinator talks. So I don't know if everybody can see that. Okay, so what I want to do is introduce you to pollinator diversity tonight. And what I'm going to focus on is just the order Hymenoptera. And this order contains bees, wasps, ants, and sawflies. And Hymenoptera are one of the, well, they're very, very important native pollinators and highly adapted to pollinate plants. So the Hymenoptera include the bees, wasps, ants, and sawflies. And there's about 4,000 plus species of native bees in North America and about 20,000 species worldwide. Okay, when I talk about Hymenoptera, we have entomologists like to use Latinized names, but hymen means married and optera means wings. So these are the married wings, and I'll explain what that means in just a minute. But this order of insects includes what I consider the 4 Ps: the predators, parasitoids, pollinators, and pretty. And that includes sawflies, parasitic wasps, solitary and social wasps, and solitary and social bees. And some are incredibly beautiful, as you can see here. This is a metallic sweat bee, and then these are parasitic wasps that are attacking insects that live in wood. And look at their elongated egg-laying device or ovipositor. And many of these are highly recognized, and they're feared because many produce painful stings to protect themselves or mobilize their prey. But I'm going to go into this in greater detail, because a lot of time when people hear about bees, all of a sudden they have this negative reaction because they're thinking about yellow jackets and bald-faced hornets and social wasps. So the Hymenoptera are the married wings. And so if you can see here, these are little tiny hooks called hamuli, and they're on the front end or the front end of the hind wing, and then there's a channel on the base of the front wing, and these little hooks connect into that channel so that they can increase the surface area for flight. And this is one of the reasons why bumblebees can actually fly. And then when they need to forage for pollen and nectar, they can unhook these wings, or if they're also looking for a prey, and then they can fold them over their backs, and so they don't come in contact with the pollen, nectar, or their prey when they're moving around in the substrate. Okay, so the first group are the sawflies, and if you see here, their abdomen is broadly attached to their thorax. So they look like very, very broad-waisted. Kind of think of us as we age, how our waists kind of expand. So that's the sawflies. And their egg-laying device or ovipositor hasn't been modified for a sting, so they can't actually sting an individual. And then if you look at bees, wasps, and ants, they have a very, very narrow connection between the abdomen and the thorax. So we call these constricted waisted or narrow waisted insects. And here's an example of an adult sawfly. So this is sometimes gets, because of this long ovipositor, people in the woods get very, very nervous about this, thinking they're gonna sting, especially lumberjacks and people like that. They call them stump jumpers, and sometimes they use some other colorful language for them. And then here is the larvae that look like caterpillars, and they're very, very much look like butterfly and moths with their shape and everything, but they have, if you look here, they have 7 prolegs that they use to attach themselves to the leaf, and then they don't have any little hooks on the end of those prolegs. And the butterflies and moths use these little hooks to attach themselves to the leaf and feed. So those are the sawflies, and they mainly feed externally on plants, but there's a wheat stem sawfly and a few others that actually feed within the stem of a plant. So distinguishing wasps from bees, then wasps are generally relatively hairless. And if they do have hair, the hair is unbranched. And I'll show you a picture of that when we start to look at bees. And the difference between wasps and bees are wasps provision their nests with animal rather than plant material. And they usually attack insects and spiders as a food source. And there's three types of wasps. There's parasitic, solitary, and social wasps. This is an example of parasitic wasp. You can see here, their ovipositor or egg-laying device hasn't been modified as a stinger, but this is a little ichneumon sticking its ovipositor into an insect that's located in the plant. This is another one here. This is a little aphidiid wasp, and you can see how acrobatic it is. It's actually got its abdomen curled, and it will jab its egg-laying device or ovipositor into the aphid, lay an egg, the egg will hatch, and the larvae will feed inside of it, glue the aphid to the plant surface, and then as it eats the aphid from the inside out, the aphid turns into this brown kind of basketball-shaped insect with two little tailpipes at the end of their abdomens. And so you can tell if you have a parasitization going on, if you see these kind of large kind of basketball-shaped aphids in a colony of aphids. And I know most people aren't real excited about aphids, but think of aphids as kind of the fast food restaurants of insects, because there's so many different insects that attack them. And these little parasitic wasps attack caterpillars, beetles, flies, and many soft-bodied insects that we consider pests like aphids and scales, mealybugs, and whiteflies. So the solitary wasps are interesting because they basically have to lay an egg, they have to provision the larvae with food all by themselves. There's no workers to help them out. These are just three types of solitary wasps. You can see here, here's one that is basic. Well, I need to back off. First off, their egg laying device has now been modified as a stinger. And so they use that to immobilize their prey. So this little wasp here is actually carrying its prey underneath its legs, and they can either crawl or fly with this, and then they'll place that in the ground, lay an egg on it, and then the larvae will develop on it. This one here is called a spider wasp, and it attacks spiders. And this one here is called a velvet ant or a mutilid, and it attacks insects in the soil, often bees and flies, but also beetles and other insects that live in the soil. The next group are the ones that we really are nervous about, are the social wasps, the yellow jackets, bald-faced hornets, mason, paper, and potter wasps. And these wasps are social because they have three castes. They have the queen, the worker, and the males or drones. And in this case, the fertilized queen overwinters, and then she has to start a new colony every spring. And so she'll be out foraging for prey, and she'll collect enough prey, and then she'll lay eggs on it. The eggs will hatch. And then as the larvae and pupate and emerge as adults, then they'll become the workers, and then she'll stay in the hive and continue to produce eggs. And they have very effective stings, and they can sting multiple times. And the workers can attack repeatedly, and they often do it in groups, and they have what's called an alarm pheromone or an aggregation pheromone. And so if they feel like their nest is coming under attack, then they can all come out in mass and sting multiple times. So I don't know if any of you have ever experienced that in the woods, where you've gotten close to a hive, and then you've got this mass of wasps that emerge to protect their hive. And so, like I said, in the temperate zones, the colonies survive for a single season. The new queen will mate, and then she'll survive the winter and start a new colony in the spring. And oftentimes, if they've been very, very successful with their hive in a particular area, they'll come back to that same area and reestablish a new hive. And they can build nests underground. Others are found in open on branches, under eaves, or in wall voids. And there have been people that have had these develop in their wall voids, and they've actually carved out between the studs and actually carved out like mason board and stuff like that and entered the house. So that would be a scary event for anybody. Okay, so now the bees are different than the wasps. One, because they provide pollen and nectar for their larvae. And I should back up with the wasp. I didn't mention the wasps are actually, especially solitary and social wasps, can be very, very good pollinators because the adults need pollen and nectar for energy. And so they'll be foraging on the flowers, picking up pollen and nectar. And once they've gained enough nutrition, then they'll go out and start to look for prey for their larvae. The bees provision their nests with pollen and nectar to nourish their larvae. The bees tend to be hairier than wasps, and the hairs on the body are branched. And so here's a picture of what I'm talking about. The hairs have these little tiny branches on them. They look like little tiny Christmas trees underneath the microscope. And they also have specialized areas for carrying pollen. And oftentimes they have some kind of a flattened area called a pollen basket or corbicula. But we'll talk about some of the bees that actually collect the pollen in different areas than on the legs. And then the special hairs here, they're called scopa, and they're branched. And again, they're very, very effective at trapping pollen. And also the bee and the pollen tend to be of opposite charges. So the pollen will sometimes almost jump on the bee's body because of that difference in charge. Okay, the first group are the solitary bees. They have to construct their own nests, and they have to provide food for her offspring. And she has no help from other females, so there's no caste system. She usually dies or leaves before offspring mature, and many of them nest in the ground. About 70% do, and about 30% nest above ground in various cavities. And again, the solitary, and I like to mention this, and I know I'm talking to the choir, but the solitary bees they will generally will not sting, or it takes a lot of effort to get stung by a solitary bee, because again, it's dangerous to sting anything that's disturbing you, and you run the risk of being killed or injured. And if that happens, then you can no longer lay eggs, or you can no longer provision food for your larvae. So they are very, very reticent at stinging. And they're composed of 5 families. And I'm going to talk about those 4 of the common families in the Pacific Northwest. So the first one are the solitary bees, or the mining bees. These are the family Andrenidae. And they mainly nest in the grounds, and they are often found in colonies though. So it's not like there's one individual here and one individual there. If you run across them, you may find a large number of the females that have created a nest next to each other. These bees are short-tongued, and that'll contrast to those that are longer-tongued when I talk about the megacylids and honeybees and bumblebees. But so they tend to forage and collect pollen on asters and flowers that have a very, very open face. And the interesting thing is, you can see here, this is a jugalobe, and this is a vanalobe, and this is one of the characteristics we look at for bees. In this case, a jugalobe is as long or longer than the submedian cell, which is here, and it's over 3/4 the length of a vanal cell. And the other thing about Andrenidae is they have 2 subantennal sockets. These sutures here by the antennal sockets, these 2 subantennal sutures. But unfortunately, a lot of the bees have hair on their face, and so it's difficult to see those sutures. And this basal vein here is very, very straight. And that'll make more sense when I talk about the next couple of families of bees. So there's about 1,200 species in North America. And they're small to medium-sized bees, and most of them are pretty nondescript. They're kind of dark brown and black, but you can see the scopa, or the hairs on the legs where they collect the pollen. The next family are the Collididae, or the yellow-faced, which you can see here, or entomologists call them the clown-faced bees. And then the plaster bees, these are bees that actually plaster their larval cells with a material that's like cellophane. And there's about 150 species in North America. And the subfamily Collineae are, they tend to be more robust and hairy than the Hylineae here, the clown-faced bees. But their second recurrent vein is S-shaped, and I'll show you what that looks like. It's right here. So if you have that, you know you're looking at a bee that's in the genus Collides and the subfamily Collineae. The next group are the sweat bees. There's about 500 species in North America, and again, they're short-tongued bees. The basal vein is arched, and I'll show you an example of that. They tend to be small to moderate sized, but there's some of them that are beautiful, these metallic greens. There's the metallic green sweat bee, Agapostemon. It is a beautiful bee. And most of these nest in the ground, on level ground or in banks. And also this group, and actually I'm finding halictid sweat bees are nesting in the Mount Vernon cemetery. And I've also found them nesting around the condo complex that we live in. So I'm real excited about following them and seeing how their populations are going to progress and develop. So this is that basal vein. See how it's arched like this, and it almost forms a right angle with this cross vein here. And then here's again another picture of the pollen on the legs and caught on the hairs of this beautiful metallic sweat bee. The next group now, this becomes the long-tongued bees, and these are the megachillas, the leaf-cutting mason bees, and actually there's the carder bees too, but there's about 600 species of those. They're moderate size to stout bees, and they carry their pollen underneath their abdomen like this. So this is different than the other three families that we've talked about before. And this is osmia, or many of you may be familiar with the blue orchard bees, which happen to belong to this particular genus. And this is megachila, which the alfalfa leafcutter bee belongs to this group. And they nest above ground. And so here's just an example of one of the nest box, and I know all of you are probably familiar with these, but they will either, like the mason bees, will use mud, and they'll line these cells with mud, and then they'll lay an egg. Well, they'll put pollen and nectar in there, lay an egg, and then they'll seal it, and then the egg will hatch and the larvae will feed inside of there. And they can have several of these cells inside the cavity. The leafcutter bees, rather than using mud, they cut out well, the edges of your leaves. And I don't know if any of you like roses, but when I was working with the master gardeners in Ephrata, a lot of them were loved roses, and so they'd have leafcutter bees come along and cut out these notches out of their leaves, or strawberry root weevils would also do the same thing. And so that I thought they looked were quite beautiful because they were more sculptured leaves, but most of the master gardeners didn't enjoy my pleasure at seeing leafcutter bees. And the next group are the social bees, and these are the honey and bumblebees. And so you can see here, I just wrote down some of how valuable honeybees are as far as economics. So you can see They're important honey and beeswax. Pollinating activities are worth about 130 to 140 times the amount above. And bumblebees are being used to pollinate tomatoes in the greenhouses. They do what's called buzz pollinating. They can actually unhook their wings, and they can vibrate the wings and not fly, and they create a vibration which is the same as middle C, and it'll actually vibrate the pollen off of the plant, and then it'll fall onto the stamen and fertilize the tomatoes. They're also being used in blueberries, raspberries, and much more. So they're very, very important contributors to pollination in agriculture, and also for our gardens. Okay, so with honey and bumblebees, they have distinct caste system. They have a queen, workers, and drones. They're long tongue. You can see the tongue here. This is a honeybee. And again, the honeybee overwinters in a hive. Both the queen and the workers survive the winter, which is very, very unusual. And I think most of you know that honeybees are not native to North America, that they were brought over here about 400 years ago with when European Americans began colonizing North America. With the bumblebees, they're what's considered primitively social because only the queen survives. So what will happen is at the end of the season, the colony will produce a group of queens and also males, and then the males will mate with the queens, and then the queens will have to find some place to overwinter. Usually they find something underneath the duff or someplace like that where they can dig a small cavity, and they'll go down into that cavity, and then they'll stay spend the winter there, and then they'll emerge early in the spring. So I generally like to tell people not to bother bumblebees early in the spring or to collect them, because they're actually the queens, and they're out trying to establish a colony. So if you see a bumblebee that's flying very, very close to the ground, they're probably a queen that's looking for a place to nest, and they'll create a nest underground in various cavities. So just distinguishing honeybees from other bees are, most of you would not mistake them, but occasionally some of the other bees do look somewhat like a honeybee. And so they have hairy eyes, and then they have a very, very large pollen basket associated here. And usually they have kind of this unique coloration, kind of these banding patterns on their abdomen. And my son was into transformers. This is bumblebee, so I did this for him. But so bumblebees, there's about 40 species in North America, 25 in Washington, and they're very large, robust bees with black and yellow coloration, and a few are marked with orange or white patterns as well, and their hind wings lack a jugulote. So that's one of the defining characteristics of bumblebees. And most bumblebees nest in the ground, usually in a mouse or a bird nest. There are annual colonies. The first brood is raised by the queen. Once the first brood matures, the female workers take over the colony duties, including care of the larvae. They enlarge the nest, collect food, and store it in honey pots of wax and pollen. And then, like I said, the colony will grow over time, and usually the colony won't get, well, it depends on the species, but they usually don't get much larger than maybe 50 to about 250 members in the colony. So they don't get as large as a honeybee colony can get, where you can have, several thousand workers. And I put this in here just to give you an idea of the diversity of size. So we're looking at 600 plus native bees in Washington. This is one of the smallest, not in Washington. There's actually one smaller than that in North America. And then you can look at the largest one here. So I just wanted you to see the size variation of these various bees. And I have to thank Don Rawls for this. He's the one that put this together. He's been studying bees for the last 15 years, and he does a wonderful job of spreading the bees and taking pictures of them, as you can see here. So. And there's other pollinators, which I'm not going to talk about tonight. And flies can be very, very good pollinators. Beetles can also be very good pollinators. I call them trash and burn because they usually land on a composite and they're eating pollen and picking up nectar and pretty much trashing the flowers. But in the process, they also pick up quite a bit of pollen and can move it from flower to flower. And then the butterflies and moths are very good, and even thrips can be good pollinators, even though a lot of times we think of them as pests. And these are some references I thought you might like. I really have found these helpful. This is Common Bees, North America, the bees in your backyard. And this is Common Bees of Western North America, just this kind of flip chart. See these field guides, the Common Bees of California and California Bees and Blooms is another wonderful book for helping you become more familiar with bees. And also Brenda's going to talk a lot about plants for pollinators. And so this is a good book that kind of covers both areas of pollination. And then this is Feed the Bees and Natural Lawns. And the other thing I want to give a plug to Xerces Society. They are a nonprofit that is working to conserve invertebrate animals, mostly insects. And they have a wonderful website, and they've been working with preserving bees and also monarch butterflies and dragonflies and a whole host of other insects. So if you would like to find something out about bees or other insects, I would check out the Xerces Society, and they'll have a lot of references that'll take you to other areas where you can obtain more information. And then this is a wonderful book again of the Xerces Society. And so this talks about some of the common bees and then what you can do to attract the pollinators using native plants. And with that, I am finished. So I'm going to turn this over to Brenda. So I'm going to quit sharing. Okay, Brenda, I think I'm all right.
Great, thank you, Bob. I was just starting my share. My next door neighbor decided to work on his boat engine, so I had to have my husband go out and tell him to stop it for like 15 minutes. So, okay, can everybody see somebody give me a thumbs up if they can see my screen.
We can see.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. So I've been here a couple of times to this group to talk about native plants, and this was a little bit different. You know, Bob coming into the area and infusing a lot of energy about pollinators has been terrific. So it gave me an excuse to bone up about pollinators and how plants can play a role in supporting those pollinators. So the first message, you guys are probably already all on board with this, but I just want to point out, I think that we see a growing movement of looking at plants as more than just eye candy or a form of entertainment or display, that they really have a functional role in helping us ecosystem services, whether it's erosion control or cleaning the air, creating oxygen. There's plants are very important to our lives. They're essential, and we shouldn't just treat them as nothing more than decorative elements. There is a strong function for plants. Like Bob, that's great. He ended talking about Xerces Society because that's probably my #1 source of information that I found. Even when if you in your search engine ask about pollinator gardens, you'll go down a lot of rabbit holes and tons of information out there, but they all seem to be sourcing their information from the Xerces Society, and for good reason. And there are publications on their website, kind of 4 or 5 page documents for each area of the country. And there's a very good one for us here in the Maritime Northwest region. And it focuses on what kind of plants to plant for pollinators. And they have kind of 5 steps of things you should do to promote and support pollinators in your yard. And the first one is to plant native species, right up my alley. And I just wanted to throw in this little, it's an old study, 21 years old now, but I think sure more studies have been done since then, but it's a quick and easy visual to see that these insects were monitored or observed in real backyards that had both native and non-native plants in them. And the green bars are the native plants. And they found not only much higher abundance of insects, as you would expect, because native plants have been evolving alongside these insects for a long time. So when you bring in a non-native plant, that insect may not be able to utilize it and will turn to the native plants. So far more insects on native plants and far greater numbers of species or diversity of insects on native plants than on non-native plants. And the importance of that goes back to feeding the birds. Yes, we all love to have plants that are perfect looking and don't have any holes or marks on them. But in reality, those marks and holes on the leaves indicate that there's life out there, and those plants are actually supporting insects that turn around and support our birds or pollinate our plants. And again, I'll this preaching to the choir about the benefits of native species. In fact, Val used all these same messages at the very beginning, how they're adapted to our soils, use less water, and don't require so many fertilizers and lower maintenance. And I am not a purist, so I have fruit trees and vegetables in my yard. I love that. And I love to spend time taking care of those and enjoying the native plants and propagating them, but not worrying about high maintenance on those or spending time watering those plants. So getting back to pollinators and how to figure out what plant species would be the best for pollinators. Again, there are lots of resources to help you decide which plants will do well in your yard. The Washington Native Plant Society, that's WNPS.org, has a lot of information about plant species on it. The King County has a program called Go Native. And if you just do a search on Go Native King County, you'll come up with a pretty extensive website where you can search for plants by different characteristics. If you've got a dry, shady place and you want an evergreen, you can put those kinds of characteristics in there, and it'll come up with a short list of plants for you and information about those plants. And then, of course, I encourage you to visit display gardens. Some are open now. Our display garden at WSU Research Station is not open to the public yet, but when they are, that's certainly a good place to go and look at what plants are doing well in your area and natural areas. I think once we start teaching ourselves more and more about pollinators or birds or any kind of wildlife that we're trying to promote, we become more aware and we start noticing when we're in natural areas, we may notice the native plants and start thinking about those in terms of how we could incorporate them in our yards. So planting native species. The second one they mentioned is planting clusters of the same species, making it easier for pollinators to find them. And an example that comes to mind for me right now is I have a pear tree in my front yard and it's just loaded with blossoms. And so there are quite a few bees on it. Well, it's easy for them to find because it's this enormous area of white flowers. So it's basically like a cluster of a lot of the same species of flower. So they don't have to expend a lot of energy flying from place to place to find the food. I say that this takes some discipline, and because I'm guilty of it all the time, as I get a new plant or I find that a plant is doing well in one spot, so I dig half of it up and I move it to a far another spot. You know, it's like the cottage garden or something look, where you have plants scattered all over because you want to see a little spot of yellow there and a spot of red there. Well, it's really better for the pollinators if we can get ourselves to cluster the plants together. So, you know, putting your penstemons of the same species together. So when the bees visit that, they really are creatures of habit of visiting the same species again and again, which makes them terrific pollinators. But it does mean that they need to have a larger mass of the same species of plant in one area to support them, really attract them. So bigger swaths of the same species is better for the pollinators. And sometimes it's a different look. Sometimes it's a more attractive look for design elements. It's a little more calming, but it's hard for me anyway. I have to remind myself to do that every time. And then choosing plants that flower at different times, so you're providing for the pollinators over a really long season, is ideal. And that's, again, where you could turn to various Xerxes Society. I'm going to show you that example again, but also Bob didn't talk about butterflies. We agreed in advance he was going to talk about bees, but I know that a lot of people are interested in butterflies, and they are a form of pollinator. I wanted just to introduce you guys to the National Wildlife Federation's Plant Finder tool. And it is in a beta version, so it's not fully formed yet, but it's kind of fun to play with. And so you go to the site, nwf.org, Native Plant Finder plants. And again, it's specifically about butterflies, with the idea being that butterflies need to lay their eggs and their larvae need to feed on specific plants, and that birds need those caterpillars to feed to their young. So it's all connected between plant to caterpillar to bird. But butterflies are certainly important as pollinators. So I could click on this right now, but I'm just going to show you a couple images of what the site looks like as a teaser. And it's really a better thing for you on your own time to just cruise it and see what you can learn about your area. So if you go to the site, they ask you where your zip code is. So I put in Camano Island, little tiny numbers up here, 98282. And what comes up is a list of flowers and grasses that are in your area just by genus. So it's not super specific, but like we think of sagebrush, artemisia. Well, we have wormwoods that are also artemisias that are here in the Northwest. Fragaria is the genus for strawberries. And what's cool here is this little tiny number, 76 with the butterfly image. That tells you that there are 76 species of butterflies and moths in this area that use strawberry plants for their young. So they lay eggs and the larvae feed on that genus of plant. Same for, I can't even read the viola one, 27, I think it is. It's white on light. That's big. So you get the idea. There's a lot of butterfly and moth species that use specific plants in the Northwest. And this is just the flowers and grasses. If I were to scroll down on the page, I get this image, which is trees and shrubs. Here's where you get the really big numbers. So if you were to plant a willow, it has the potential to be supporting 339 species of butterflies and moths. There's a lot of diversity here that we're not even aware of. At least I'm not aware of in the butterflies and moths. But you can see across the board, there's willows are big producers, are very important to butterflies. Plants in the genus Prunus, which are cherries, Populus, which are the cottonwoods and poplars, and alders and birches. So yeah, the big one here is the willow genus Salix, but these others are also very important to butterflies and moths here in the Northwest. So if you're trying to decide, I've got room to put one more tree, and you're trying to decide what kind of tree to get, this could be a place for you to go to narrow down your options. At that same site, that was finding native plants. You can do the reverse and look at butterflies. And if you click on the butterfly list, you get a list of all the butterflies that are known to occur in your area, 98282. And you can see how many species of plant they are dependent upon. So this coral hairstreak is known to put its eggs and larvae on just one species of plant. And I wanted to click on one that the morning cloak is a pretty common butterfly. You might be familiar with that. And so it's known to use 6 species of plants as hosts for caterpillars. Again, salix, the willows are right there, poplars, alders, birches, maples, and there's apparently one other genus in there. So 6 different kinds of plants are really important to the morning cloak. So you could go down a rabbit hole trying to decide what to put in your yard. The short of it is, based on kind of this research, I decided to put a bitter cherry plant tree in my yard. I don't have a lot of room for more trees, but I thought I want to do the right thing with these butterflies. So bitter cherry is good for butterflies. The larvae will attract birds. And of course, also, hopefully we'll see some butterflies that didn't get eaten by birds. Again, the Xerxes is a really great source. This is that same document I talked about earlier, the plants of the Maritime Northwest region, trying to choose some of those plants that flower at different times for the pollinators, not just for the butterflies, but for the bees. This is an example. I don't expect you to be able to read this, but to get a sense of, in that document, there's this great table that shows a list of plants. The forbs are the non-woody flowering plants, and the shrubs and trees down here, and kind of an idea of who blooms early, middle, late, early, middle, late. So it's a good idea to pick 1 or 2 from each of these categories and try to incorporate a bigger area of them in your yard in order to provide food for bees year round. And this one, they have the early mid is Oregon grape is in here. I don't see evergreen huckleberry, and I would have put that even before. That blooms so early, like in February, and I do see hummingbirds on it, and certainly once bees are out, they're feeding on it as well. So that was choosing plants that flower at different times, just to try to find a wide range, long season of blooming plants. And then here's a hard one for gardeners: leave stems on the plants. So don't clean up your garden as much as you want to, maybe certainly not in the fall, but even in the spring. We're very tempted to get out there and start whacking down the old stems. And as much as you can leave, like as little as 4 inches, but as much as 24 inches, or maybe do a variety of heights of those stems, that would be great, because a lot of the bees that are cavity nesters can chew and burrow down into those stems. I like this little sign. Was at a park in Chicago where they're explaining why. I think it's probably echinacea or something that they've left the stems of, so that the bees have habitat for nesting. So as much as you can tolerate doing that kind of thing, that really provides cavity nesting hollows for the bees. And I think it would be really fun to make a point of, as you're working in your garden, see what plants produce hollow stems, and maybe leave those in particular so that the bees can use them. Also, just when you're out and about, again, if you have a more awareness of the need for the bees for these hollow stems, you find yourself looking for that. I find myself even walking in the woods, when I see a dry stem, I might snap it off just out of curiosity to see, oh, is it hollow? Is this something that could be good for bees? So just becoming more aware of it. It does take a long time for the bees to mature. So we're talking about, pretty much leaving stems of some height all the time in your garden. And then the last one on their list was providing ground nesting habitat. And Bob talked about that and seeing some in the cemetery and near his condo. And that's really exciting. We're together, Bob and I are going to try to set up some ground nesting habitat areas for bees at the Washington State University's campus there in the crabapple orchard he was talking about. So, but if we build it, will they come? We're gonna learn. So just as examples, this would be a diagram of a bee nesting in the ground. They'll also use old rodent holes, bird houses, the base of bunch grasses. One day recently, I saw a queen bumblebee was looking around underneath the strawberry plants in my yard, native strawberries. And there's probably a lot of bare soil under those native strawberries because the leaves kind of are basically preventing weeds from growing underneath it. So she spent a lot of time under that strawberry plant. I wondered if she was digging a hole. Here's an example, just an image of, this was at a play field where, as Bob said, some of these ground nesting bees can be kind of social in that there are many of them in one area. And this was a birdhouse in my yard in May one year. I found that bumblebees had taken it over, and there's, I guess this is pollen and wax or something that's on the outside, and they just filled up this birdhouse, and that was fine. Chickadees had used it in the past, and I let the bumblebees use it. And then at the end of the season, of course, when only one, just the queen, is still alive, I don't know where she was, but I was able to clean out the house safely and didn't destroy any bees. And the next year, birds used it again. So it's possible that they, it was just the right place at the right time, and these bumblebees chose to use my birdhouse. So just a few pictures of the specific plants that I talked about. Willows, as I say, we have a lot of native willows here, pretty easy to propagate. Get some in your yard if you're interested in that. The bitter cherry is a great one. These are the really high production ones for butterflies. Willows, bitter cherry, birches. A lot of people in the cities have white birches in their front yards, but we have a native birch that's really lovely. The paper birch has a more of a salmon colored bark. These are in our display garden at the WSU campus. Produce yellow golden leaves in the fall, like the white birch does. And the shrubs that Bob and I are working on picking out for the hedgerow project he mentioned at the WSU campus. I really tried to find a range of shrubs that would bloom from February through August and get those established in this hedgerow. And the first one would be this evergreen huckleberry. You guys may be very familiar with this plant. It's an easy to grow, easy. You can prune it, or you can make it, let it look pretty wild like this one. It's blooms so early that, as I say, I've seen hummingbirds feeding on it, and later there's kind of a dark fruit that birds can eat as well. All Oregon grape is blooming right now. It's actually kind of on the tail end of blooming. It's been blooming for a while, and I've seen it just covered with bees at times. Hummingbirds feed on it as well. Again, it's easy to prune and take care of. Very tolerant plant. The next one that probably will bloom is the Pacific 9 bark, which is more of a big, tall, bushy plant with these white, very soft-looking white balls of flowers. And then our salal also has edible fruit. Some years it's quite good, some years it gets dried up, but it's always worth a try. It's a very, again, another lovely plant to grow. Red elderberry blooms a little bit later. It's quite showy, and great for bees. The white flowers are great for bees. The stems of the plant are hollow, and they're a good diameter for bees to use. So I encourage you, if you have one of these, to not break up all the stems at the end of the season. Sometimes the stems, it's one of those plants that a lot of it dies back every year, and you end up with hollow, dead stems. I would just leave those as much as you can tolerate from year to year. The fruit is super attractive to birds. I live in Mount Vernon, and there's Little Mountain Park has a bunch of red elderberry, and that is the place to go and see Western tanager. So it's always fun to look for red elderberries when the birds are passing through. And then the last one I mentioned here is ocean spray, kind of one of the later bloomers, and a very showy plant, nice for a hedgerow as well. And then there's a ton of herbaceous plants that would be good for pollinators. These would be plants that die back completely to the ground in the winter. These are goldenrods, camas, lupin, checker mallow, clarkia. These are all really attractive to bees and probably to butterflies as well. Goldenrods are really high on the list for butterfly larvae to feed on. So it's always good if you have room for some goldenrods in your yard to get those started. Asters, there's a lot of aster species in the Northwest that are native, from short ones, when I say short, maybe like a foot or 2 feet tall, to ones that are 6 feet tall. So just depending on your situation and what you can have room for. But again, here at the bottom, I wanted to say, I think we have a lot to learn about what the bees could use. And I think it's kind of a fun idea to just be looking at your landscape, whether it be your own yard or a park that you're walking through, and just try to note what plants have hollow stems that actually might be useful for bees to nest in, and start thinking about how you could incorporate those into your landscape. So again, choosing native species, lots of resources. The Xerxes publication I talked about. This is the Go Native site for King County, Washington Native Plant Society. This is a plant finder tool. And the last thing I didn't mention yet was the Burke Herbarium website. That's a good source for just double checking whether something is native or not, what its range is. It's got maps of where these plants are found in Washington State, county by county. It's kind of a cool site to just cruise around in. Really good collection of photographs. It's based on where they have herbarium specimens, but then also some of the staff have gone out and done forays and are excellent photographers. A really good collection of pictures. And then when it comes to buying native species, the conservation districts, Snohomish Conservation District has an excellent sale, but it opens in January. So you really need to be kind of aware of it in the fall and be thinking about it and get on their mailing list so that you learn about when their sale starts. And then, you order online and then pick up usually in Monroe, and great place to get bare root plants, but also a variety of other things. I bought gallon pots of Trillium there this year, so already potted up. You just never know what you're going to find on their list. And Washington Native Plant Society, that's WNPS. A lot of chapters have sales. This spring, 3 chapters on the west side have sales. I think the Seattle one is closing tomorrow, but ours is open until Sunday night, I should say. We're going to close it Monday morning. And Colma-Culshan, which is the chapter in Whatcom County, I believe their sale is still open as well. And before we got on, I checked to see what species we still had, because our sale has been open for about a week. And we still have vine maple, big leaf maple, birch, hazelnut, cascara, 9-bark, oak, ash, cherry, and goldenrod. So a lot of the plants I mentioned tonight, except for the little flowery things, went really quickly in the sale, but I still have a lot of trees and shrubs. The Master Gardener fairs, whether it's Skagit or Snohomish County, I'm really proud as Skagit Master Gardeners have started for years now. They've been incorporating more and more native plants in their sale. So I applaud them for that. And they get some good quality native plants as well. Nurseries, I hate to show any favoritism towards particular nurseries, so I won't give you any names, but just ask for native plants when you go into a nursery. They should know that you're looking for them, and they should have a place. I mean, most nurseries do have a section that's devoted to native plants, but it's always good to let them know that that's what you're looking for. And mail order. I've had a lot of fun starting to learn how to grow things from seed. These Clarkia in the picture, super, super easy to grow from seed. They're basically a winter annual, so they go to seed in my yard. I usually put the seed stalks, the seed tops off to one side, so I kind of know where they are. They sprout in the fall, and I have little, maybe 1-inch tall plants all winter long that are bright green, even under the snow. And then come spring, they're starting to put on height, and they will look like this in June, early June. So it's super easy, crazy to think that that's a native plant. It's just so bright colored. So with that is my program, and we can take questions.
So I've now allowed you to, theoretically, if I did this right, you can unmute and ask your questions, or I think Val's going to read from the chat.
I see one question is, when is the time to clean up the stems around here? That's the tough thing, is I would say anytime right now you could cut them off, but if you can stand it, please just cut them off. Like 12 at varying heights, whatever could look attractive to you. As short as 4 inches, but if you can leave as much as 24 inches or something in between. Bob, do you have a good sense of that? Yeah.
Yeah, Brenda, I would agree with you. Leave the stems open because the mason bees are emerging now. And so those stems would be really, really useful for them to nest in. And
So,
you're
like,
right, I think several different heights, like from 12 inches to maybe 24 inches seems to be best for the bees.
so the
And
bees
like you
are
say,
emerging
that's
now, and they're
probably
looking
kind
for
of
a place to
unattractive.
burrow and put their eggs in the stems.
Yeah, they're emerging right now.
Yeah. And somebody's asked the same thing I have asked myself, because I like, well, can't I just cut them off and leave them on the ground? I'm afraid I think they don't use well, do you know?
Well, you could cut them off, but what I would do is bundle them, and then make a cylinder, and then maybe hang it somewhere, and then they might be able. But one of the ends has to be closed, so they might be able to use it that way. If leaving the stems upright really drives you crazy, that would be one way to do that.
I have
So
kind of
I guess yeah, Brenda, I was going to say, especially if you have a node, if you could cut it just below the node, so that created the one end that would be closed.
I see what you mean. Yeah. Yeah. I have kind of a big area of goldenrod, and I know it probably drives my neighbors crazy that I leave the stems all up all winter, and maybe cutting half of them down, and the ones in the back I leave up and try to cut them at different heights to come up with some compromise that's not too unattractive.
Yeah.
Do mason bees nest in vertical stems?
Not that I'm aware of. No, they need some kind of a horizontal stem as far as I'm familiar with, but there are other bees that do, like there's a large carpenter bee and a small carpenter bee that they will utilize the stem in a more upright position. So
it's possible mason bees would use a bundle that you put together, but carpenter bees would use the up and down.
Yeah, the carpenter bees would be more up and down, and some of them, like the large carpenter bee, and then there's a carter bee too that is also in that group that would probably use a stem that was up and down.
So there was a question at the beginning about explain more about layering.
Oh yeah, I think that might be for Val, isn't it?
I think Val's the one that said that.
I did. So by layering, we mean that you have ground cover and shrubs and smaller trees, larger trees. And by doing that, the wildlife likes like birds, towhees like it down on the ground, kinglets are way on the tippy tops of trees sometimes, or the raptors are up there looking for whatever. And so so by layering, you're providing opportunities for a lot of different wildlife. We once had we did 2 different programs, one on the cedar tree and one on the Doug fir, and it was amazing all the life that was in that tree from top to bottom. So so by layering in the yard, so in our yard, we took out the grass. We did grass out of not all at once, but we first planted uh, strawberries, and they just go wild. And then we added in different ground covers, like the kinnikinnick is a little slower. We have some salal that's considered a ground cover sometimes in some lists, but it can be a big bush. So so that took care of the bush aspect of our yard. And so by doing that, when I what used to be grass in there has wild strawberry, kinnikinnick, it has salal, it has some lilacs because I like to sniff them. So it doesn't have to be a pure native wildlife habitat, but it's just, and it fills in. We didn't kind of expect it to fill in so much, but um, it's like the woods now. And but by the layering is not having just a grass and a tree is kind of a sterile environment. So the idea of that green grass and lawn is the ultimate, is kind of not doing much at all for the wildlife. So that's what I meant by layering, and it's
And
just a delight.
I think I don't know how many people caught Doug Talamy's program on April 10th that the Native Plant Society hosted, but he's spoken many times. You can look him up on YouTube and see other programs. But I was struck that he pointed out there are a number of butterfly larvae that pupate on the ground or just below the surface of the ground. So they may, the pupa may fall out of the tree, and if they land in grass, they're as good as dead. But if they land in a place like you're describing, where there's a layering of ferns or salal or other things below the tree, there's a good chance that they will, survive in that habitat and to maturity. So that was an interesting idea about not just putting wood chips or mulch around your trees, but rather putting layering plants below your trees.
And when people think about having a butterfly garden and forgetting that there's all the stages to get the butterfly, and your garden needs to have those plants as well as the ones they like when they're butterflies. So
Yeah.
any more questions? Well, going once for questions. Then I want to thank Brenda and Bob for doing this co-program. I think it really brings to light how we're connected, and how things that we do matter, and it's what we put in our gardens that what affects the pollinators that provide for the gardens later on. And so that cycle is kind of seen. So thank you both for working together to do this.
Well,
And
you guys are doing amazing things here in Camano. I'm Camano. I just amazed how many habitat gardens you have certified now, and congratulations. You'll get 1,000.
oh yeah, yeah. I was hoping to do it by August last year, but COVID kind of slowed us up. But we've been doing these programs on the third Wednesday of the month since 2003, and we started our project in 2002. We launched it in 2003 and organized it 2002. So we keep just trucking along, and so our next speakers, if you want to think about what's happening in May. In May, we will have Scott Henson, and he's going to talk about how climate change and what we do in our garden matters. And so he's with this project Drawdown, and it's the idea of, what we do. It's kind of like the certified habitats, what we all do in our yards can make a difference. So he'll be doing a Zoom for us on May 19th, so the third Wednesday. And then in June, we get otters. So Heidi Island, Dr. Heidi Island, she's been studying otters would be in Camano for several years. And I saw her program when she spoke to the Would-Be Camano Land Trust. And it's a great program, and otters are so wonderful. So that will be our next critter show in June. And then Roxy's working with a lot of different outlets to fill in the rest of the year. So now that we've mastered Zoom, we didn't do programs right away at the beginning of COVID, but now we practice before we come, and then we just say I'm sorry when we forget how to put our screens up. But it all works out. And so remember, if you need applications, you can and for your friends, just let me know. We also have them on the website, and you can always do it online with the National Wildlife Federation to help us get to 1,000. 1 yard at a time. We're an island in harmony with nature. So with that, thanks again, Bob and Brenda. It was
You're
really
welcome, Val.
Oh, you're welcome. It's my pleasure. Yeah.
We hope to be able to do it in person sometime.
I've got the
Yeah, Bob has a great collection of bees and other insects to show.
I've reserved the room for third Wednesday, so we're good to go whenever we can.
Great.
Okay. Well, stay safe, everybody.
Thank you all
Yes.
for attending. We really appreciate your
Yeah.
attendance.
Yeah.
Yes. Thanks.
Bye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you much.